I think it's like rediscovering discussion. Like just before we started this interview, like I was texting to a long-lasting friend, like Philippe Parreno. He's a like contemporary artist, and then suddenly I rediscover things that we did together that I kind of forget, and it had the kind of effect of like. You know, when you look for a drawer and then you find letters, and then suddenly, I mean, it has this kind of vertige, you know, like a vertigo where it feels like, okay, it remember you of like things that happen, but it could easily fall in the trap of melancholia. And that's what we try to avoid, you know, that it's more to projecting towards the future rather than being just retrospective and say, oh, it was so good in the past. We come from both different places, but like I was always fascinated by images, like the narrative of images. Like I was always drawn into narration, telling stories. At the time, I didn't feel I was strong enough to be able to write, and then I felt like again I didn't make any scientific research, but I was feeling like images would be the kind of expressive tool for the further years to come. So I had this kind of, I was obsessed by images, and then when I saw art more as an image rather than an art piece. You know that. So I don't want to do a psychoanalysis about the history of image because it'd be too long. But so I kind of, it was very natural that I led into that situation where I kind of said, like when I was younger, I said, well, who does produce a lot of images? That kind of studio, graphic design studio, and then also what was interesting me, it's at the cross section of many different cultural activities, so I would not be stuck in only one thing. It was very just natural and normal, but then again, that was like images for me. They were not just like a dead piece of paper. It would be each time. For me, I always see images as like doors or window that will help you to go into another world. So that's the more fantasy that maybe when you're younger that you have. Like I played with the first video game. They were very crude and very abstract, but I did believe I was entering in another world. Even if I had like red dots, I was playing with just red dots, like a football game. But when I saw the object, that was for me an image, it was a world in itself. So, I mean, then I start to be very personal, but that was for me. And then combining image, I was seeing cinema the same way, you know, like it was many doors or windows put together to create like a kind of a world in which you could circulate.
I mean, we are very different, but we also share like the same moment in history. We were born like in the post-war years of happiness and where utopian ideas about education and the future and the idea of progress and the idea of culture was part of like the environment. So even though we have like very, very different backgrounds and trajectories, there's a lot of like shared elements and shared values because they are part of that moment in history. So yeah, I mean, I probably came to do what I want to do from a completely different road than him. But at the end, it's like we are like speaking the same language.
I think for me, contrast is one of the key a key tool to.
I think it's the motor of what we do. Hair, no hair.
So and then I
blonde, dark.
I remember
it's all about the contrast.
I remember once at school, like that was when I was at the Royal College of Art. I had once a discussion with a tutor, you know, and I was drawing something, and then she said, it was a woman, she said to me, but like, I think there is something important you should get now. It's like the idea of contrast. And then, I mean, and then at the time it resonated vaguely in my head, but like since then, and then of course, I recall before that, through that moment, but like, yes, this is the key part, you know, like the idea of like high contrast, you know, and I mean, as you said, it's like it's classic but avant-garde. It's like soft but hard. It's sad but also very happy, or I mean, but it's not just like an effect. It's just how to articulate contrast. That's the most complicated thing, because as soon as you say, okay, let's do contrast, it's not just because you put two antinomic things together that it's going to be contrasted. So that's the whole chain between those two contrasts that makes that's the most difficult thing to achieve. I mean, it's been a very, very long process, you know. Also, as we said, like strategically, we took a decision, and it was very intuitive. There was like we didn't see what we were going to see in the future, but like both Michael and myself decided, like, okay, we're going to create this studio, this agency, this place called MM. So already that was a kind of a strategic decision, and then since that time we've been doing over and over the same thing. So, and we've been playing like by reacting to the present, looking back at what we done, you know, like we keep saying how when we are interviewed where we met at school, and then keeping also foreseeing what will happen, you know. Or, I mean, we didn't know one day there would be Instagram, and then, but still we knew that we needed to produce image that should be quickly deciphered, but still be in relation to one image that was before and one image to come. So the relationship to cinema was already integrated to our work, like our sequencing, or this thing also with narrative, you know, like now whatever like a designer talks, or a filmmaker, or like a TV series maker, it's always about the narrative, or a brand is always about the narrative. This we knew earlier on that will be one of the strategy within your work. The idea of the community also, you know, like I mean, for sure we didn't invent this, but Warhol, when he did the factory, there was already like the community. He was saying, okay, I'm the artist, but also the community to whom I'm engaged, it's part of my art too, you know. The idea of like the difference, you know, using music as a media, using theater as another media, fashion as another media. I mean, now it all feels normal, but when we started, fashion was not so much like a place where you expect culture to arise or art to arise. And then again, like in the shelf that we build, that here in this exhibition, you could photograph it so it looks like a complete singular image that is impact, but you could also photograph it from a close, where it's the same thing with the poster here, where it's like a detail. So even though if it's a three-dimensional object, it still could be transformed quickly in an image, which is the problem that we encounter every day, like with those kind of social media system, whether, you know, you need to build like a world, and then you know how to it construct the world so that it could be photographed well, so then people could have access to it.
I think like at the same time, every time there's like an opportunity to create something, at the same time we are both like naive and experts. So every time we try to naive in the sense that we approach the thing in a very open way, and expert because obviously we have a craft and skills to shape the naivety into something that can be performative. But I think that being said, it's also very important to us to always establish the fact that we try to communicate on a one-to-one basis. So we never address the audience in a cynical way. We never address the audience as a mass for which something should be simplified or should be shortened or should be concentrated, so it's just one thing. Nothing is just one thing. Like the idea of of shrinking the content to a symbolic dot or a symbolic sign is it's a dream, and that's why there are so many language, style, methodology, approaches from hard black and white to vivid colors, from very rigid to completely undrawn. I mean, everything is possible. There's no set up rules. But the only set up rule is that the person that's going to receive this image is, I mean, we consider that person to be as potent as we are. And so to be able to get into the thing and hopefully be able to get into the layers of the onion and be able to get into everything that led to that moment.
But this is again part of the intuitive decision that we made. Is when we started to work together, like as graphic designer, or like in that studio or agency. We rapidly said like we should have our own language. So
I think it also comes from this naive point of view that I was describing earlier. Like when I said naive, it's not like about being stupid, but it's about like having this freedom of intention at the very beginning, and typefaces, alphabets, like those shapes containing, like those later shapes that are going to be forming words and phrases and language. Every one of them in the world has been forged by someone who has put some intention and some kind of ideology inside them. And we often say that letters are like the smaller container of ideologies. And I think that's why, since we started, we've had this practice of creating our own letters, because we wanted to be free from others' ideologies. Like we wanted to be free from the use of Helvetica and the ideology of modernity. We wanted to be free from the use of like neoclassic typeface that address a certain type of content and ideology. Of course, we are fluent in those languages as well. So from time to time, we can borrow and use them in our projects. But through the process of like working, I think now we've crafted over like 100 different typefaces. We've never released them publicly. They are not available. They are only for us to use. And now they form a language that address the things the way we want them to be addressed. So they contain our own ideas and our own positions.
And recently we decided that we will release a book about those typefaces, which then answer your question, like, yes, it's important, and at one point it needs to be readdressed in the sense where we commission like a typographer and then a person that has the ability to write about typography, just to act as an art historian or like a sign historian, and then try to put understanding of what has been done. Not because it doesn't make sense, but because it's also important to get from time to time others to readdress our own work, and has so they bring a view or a position. So that's getting back there. Like it's important now, just also to help the people that have been following us for a long time, or like what we call like our community, or like the viewers. So they have, hopefully, they get to have another level of understanding in this kind of overgrowing world that we've built. Because that's also very important, that it doesn't become obscure just for the sake of being obscure. Like that's going back to the idea of the contrast. Often contrast brings helps to read things, or helps to get more precisely into the message that was delivered.
Yeah, we had this very beautiful conversation with Peter Saville, which is a great and important figure, and he said we were invited to discuss together when our latest book was released, because we had invited him to contribute to the book. And he came to the conclusion that what we had in common is that we were both, on both sides, we were like promoters of visual culture. And so in that sense, yes, we are educators. And I think the person that goes to work and write something on his computer, like in a way should have a level of understanding of what he's manipulating, because it's not the same thing. You don't say the same thing if it's a different typeface. And of course now, like the younger generation that have grown into like this digital world with the ability to embrace and use all of these signs, they kind of have an instinctive, better understanding of this. But at the same time, we can see that there is a massification of trends. Everything like languages are becoming graphic languages are becoming extremely generic very quickly. Even when something seems to appear in some sort of underground, instantly it becomes like a visual tool that can be used by the highest level of the capitalist machine to promote and sell new things.
I think it's to do with the ability of it's to get in contact with the human brain. I mean, I'm not like a specialist into humankind, but like as artists, I think the combination between the hand and the brain makes you, that gives you the ability to kind of understand the world. And I think drawing is not just like a skill of like making beautiful drawing or extraordinary complex drawing. I think it's a way just to take note or how and then try. It's a constant understanding of the world, like a good drawing.
It's actually the best training for the eye. This is what you learn. Like this is like basic art school first level. When you have to like draw a nude person, you have to make this decision of how you will transcribe like this line from that line, and this is where you train your eye and you train your hand.
It's like the understanding of the intelligence of the world, or like how it's constructed, because even though if we like there is a lot of human history, it's still like it's still very complicated to understand. Like I mean. That's why so many people trying to understand it. I think it's this constant like circulation. Like the hand has also the ability to. It's a bit like a seismograph, Like I see something, but then also sometimes I feel something, And then maybe the hand is able just to translate like a little movement that you didn't see or that you didn't think of, and because it was just like a emotional moment. I remember once we tried to do this with Björk, where she was like for Biophilia, she was like obsessed of like trying to describe her music world, and then of course we landed into the idea of like how like the how to write scores, So there is an history of scores. We are not musicians, So, but at one point we said, oh, let's try to draw your music, So we spent like 2 days drawing like all the songs of Biophilia as if we were like transcripting the music by eyes, brain, and eye, and with the hands, So of course that's a completely a utopian thing. It's looking at those drawings now. No one will be able to play back that song, but still, it might be possible sometime if you invent the right machine, or just to go back to, oh, someone drew this, listening to that, and then those drawings were put together in the application Biophilia, where it was a way for us to represent, like to give a textural, graphic representation of our musical world, which has been a constant problem into the story of humankind. But even like musical scores, yes, they are as close as possible to something that's called music, but still there is a huge gap between what you see written and then things that you see live and performed. So I don't know. I mean, to answer your question, maybe the hand. That's why it's constantly like a figure, that's a recurrent figure in the art world. I mean, when they talk about the first cave thing, or like the track of the hand. I mean, of course that's a projection, but like hands, they keep coming back into the history of art. Like some designer were completely obsessed by hands, like it's a recurring figure in some kind of famous graphic design studio. For me, it's a kind of it's like a science, It's like something that doesn't have it doesn't exist as such. It's something that's it's a shared knowledge. It's a way for some people that has the ability to try to make an understanding of the world. Like you say, there is art, there is science, there is philosophy, but like I think our position, and maybe we have different position about this, it's more like when art they self-declared, okay, here is the art world. So here are the galleries, here are the museums.
Yeah, there's many questions into that question. It's what is art and what is contemporary art, and how do you define yourself in or out of that? So I think like, as Mathias was hinting right now, I think we can both agree on the fact that what we see as art is what records human activity in some ways, and obviously this is what we try to do. So now the logical conclusion is that what we do is art, or it has become art after all these years. But then if you go back and if you move to the subject of like, do you declare yourself as a contemporary artist? I don't have so much interest into like having to negotiate with like the current the frame parameter of the contemporary art world. So this is where we.
It's more for me, like the art is something that's somehow completely immaterial, So there are many ways of defining it. So it's more like then it's more how do you address, or how do you integrate art into the everyday life, or like those kind of thinking.
I think it's more like the art versus design conversation is for us quite boring, actually. This is what I was saying, we are very classical in that sense. Because people say, oh, when it is commission, it's not expression, so it's not art. And we are like, look at art history. Like Michelangelo was commissioned, Da Vinci was commissioned. So like it's not about commission versus self-expression that makes a difference of the value of the what's being produced. Actually, I think we don't call our work and we leave the space for others to call it, even though now after like almost like 30 years of output and of practice, that we can agree and consider that we have like a body of work that's an œuvre. So it makes sense as art. But I think the definition of what is art is only very recently self-defined. I decide that I make art, so I'm an artist. I think this is something that we've stepped away from at the very beginning by deciding not to operate within the art world, but to start from a studio that's anchored in reality and in transactions with the actual real world, not the art world in the frame context of the art gallery.
I think the collaborative process is more like leaving room for the others to be with us.
But it's part of the process that we have between the two of us. I mean, it's not about being one, it's about being two already. It's about like creating a space that's in between where things can happen.
I mean, as the plan is to create like a MM world, I mean, it's very ambitious, so it looks a bit like okay, what's this kind of ambition? But I mean, if you want to make a world, I mean, the main thing about a world is the inhabitants. And I think that's why in our work there was always the room for more than one person. And that we were always fearing this thing of like, here is my castle, and please, I'm the king in that kingdom. Yeah, it's more like creating, like allowing the room for the other to exist. It's very complicated. I mean, this is already just to say, okay, I'm not only one, but I'm two. And I think, as Michael said, that was we started to work as two person because already it's before even saying I'm an artist or before even creating a piece, you then need to question yourself about like who this piece belong to, you know? Is it to the person that makes it or the person that read it or digest it?
I think because of not only of our position but also because of our training, I think we are forced to record and react to every image. That's why it's so tiring, because now the quantity of images has been like multiplied by 1 billion. So, which means like it forces us to be even more sharp and even more trained into like being able to focus and to make sense of everything that you're being fed. And that's why also I think it's important that in this flow of image, we keep an active position and we can create images that can have the ability to stop this flow also sometimes. That can act as a question mark that makes you stop for 1 second and you're just trying to understand and decipher what's inside. I mean, it's so dense, everything that's in these rooms and it's in this exhibition. We could spend like weeks talking about the content of each poster and each element and each book and everything that's in the carpets. I mean, it's like an onion that you can keep peeling and peeling and peeling because there's always a story under the. Each layer has a story, and from the stories behind to the stories in the actual making of the pieces to the actual physicality of the pieces. So there's a lot of things that are contained in those things.
I think it's the strategy of the how to contain the present. It's like how to compile like things together. It's almost like This is where we're talking about image, but it's almost like a kind of sculptural approach, where it's like we approach an image as a three-dimensional object, even if it's like two-dimensional. So that's why, as Michael is saying, it's built up with like many layers, but then we also create ways so that you could look at the image from the side. You know, I mean, I'm not trying to. It's not like a trick or like that I'm saying, but like we like the fact that you could say, okay, maybe I could look at an image that's on the wall from the back or from the top or from the underneath. That's why often the dialogue in our work is always between like a two-dimensional, three-dimensional, immersive, back to two-dimension. So it's like the image is like a window or a ball of of yarn, or it's like a ball of like a concretion of reality, and that's why it's always like made of like it's a constant dialogue, like or back and forth between like a documentary approach, looking at the world, trying to understand, decipher, and then back into a more of a narration or narrative. So there is this constant mix. And why is that? Because I think it's almost like an image should be as like the texture of an image should be as believable as like looking for a window. I mean, that's what we keep trying to build. I mean, is it successful all the time? That's another question, but that's the strategy is there at least.